What if I told you there was once a man so powerful, so fast, that defenders looked at him not as an opponent, but as an oncoming storm? This is the story of Jonah Lomu, the giant who shocked the world. If you love epic sports stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. The locker room was unnaturally quiet, a silence thick enough to press against the eardrums, broken only by the faint drip of condensation somewhere near the pipes. The locker room was unnaturally quiet, a silence thick enough to press against the eardrums, broken only by the faint drip of condensation somewhere near the pipes. The smell of liniment, leather, and damp fabric hung heavy in the air. Outside, beyond the concrete walls, a storm of voices rose and fell in restless waves. The crowd. Tens of thousands of throats colliding into one sound that shook the ground. Jonah sat alone in the farthest corner, elbows on his knees, his colossal frame hunched in a way that made him look both powerful and strangely fragile. The fluorescent light above him flickered, carving shadows across his jaw, across the curve of his shoulders, across the hands that dwarfed the ball resting in his lap. He could hear his name in the distance, Lomu, Lomu. The syllables fell like war drums. And with every chant, something twisted deeper in his chest. People saw him as a monster, a human avalanche disguised in jersey and shorts. 6 feet 5 over 260 pounds, running faster than sprinters half his size. To the outside world, Jonah Lomu was not a man, he was a phenomenon. But inside, in this stolen moment before the whistle, he was a boy who had once been sick, frail, teased by kids in the schoolyard. That boy still lived in him, whispering, reminding him of fear. Jonah leaned back, letting his head touch the cinder block wall. His eyes closed, and the roar of the stadium became a tide that pulled him backward in memory. The boy beneath the giant. There had been nights when he couldn't sleep because of the pain. His body was already a battlefield long before the world knew his name. The kidneys, fragile and treacherous, betrayed him silently, forcing him to hide weakness behind the armor of size. Nobody saw the boy staring at the ceiling, wondering if the world would remember him at all. They only saw the giant. Jonah knew the irony. People called him unstoppable, yet every step carried the shadow of a truth he could not outrun. The body they admired was already a ticking clock. And yet, Rugby had chosen him, or perhaps he had chosen Rugby as the one place where his contradictions fused into something unstoppable. Here, the body that betrayed him became a weapon, a storm. The ritual of silence. He rose slowly, stretching, feeling the tension ripple across his chest, his thighs. Every movement felt amplified, like a drumbeat rolling through the locker room. Other players glanced at him, not speaking, but their eyes said everything. When Jonah runs, the world trembles. He picked up the ball, pressed it against his chest. It felt small, laughably small, as if he could crush it between his palms. But the ball was more than leather and stitches. It was the weight of expectation, the gaze of nations. Coach's voice cut through the silence, sharp, steady, meant to ignite. Jonah barely heard the words. His mind was elsewhere, out there, on the field, where grass glistened with sweat and blood, where the sound of bodies colliding was like the rhythm of war. When you step out, you are no longer Jonah the boy. You are Jonah the giant, remember that. But the boy still whispered. The tunnel, the team lined up, boots clattered against concrete, echoing like distant gunfire. Jonah's shoulders brushed against the walls of the tunnel. He seemed too big for the space, as if the world itself had to stretch to contain him. The crowd outside swelled louder, waves breaking against invisible shores. The tunnel opened into light, and the field lay before him like a stage, green, glistening, infinite. He stepped out, and the roar was deafening, flags whipped in the wind. Faces blurred into one endless ocean of eyes fixed on him. Children on shoulders, old men clutching scarves, young fans screaming his name as if summoning a god. Jonah did not smile. He did not wave. He walked with the heavy grace of someone carrying a secret. His boots sank into the turf with each step, and he imagined roots growing from his solace, binding him to this battlefield. The haka began, the team thundered the chant, bodies moving in unison, faces contorted with fury. Jonah's voice joined, deep, primal, his eyes locked on the enemy across the line. But inside, he felt the tremor of something else, a question. Would he live up to the myth that had already been written for him? Or would the giant fall before he was truly born? The whisper of doubt, when the whistle finally shrieked, the game ignited in chaos. The ball snapped from hand to hand, bodies crashed, the grass threw beneath boots. Jonah moved with deceptive slowness until he ran, and then the illusion shattered. Each stride was thunder, each tackle that tried to meet him felt like a child clinging to a runaway train. He could hear the air tearing as he cut through it, the sound of defenders' breaths ragged and panicked as they realized, too late, that the shadow bearing down on them could not be stopped. Yet inside, Jonah heard another sound, his heartbeat, heavy, irregular, reminding him that power had its price. With every sprint, he asked himself silently, how long can I keep outrunning the truth inside me? The moment before the world changed, the ball was passed to him. He caught it, pressed it against his chest, and for a heartbeat, everything slowed. The stadium roared, but to Jonah it was silence. He saw the defenders spread out before him, a wall of white jerseys, England. Their eyes were wide, their bodies tensed. The boy in him whispered, what if they stop you? What if you fall here in front of everyone? But another voice rose, deep, commanding, the voice of the giants, run. His legs coiled like springs, the ground beneath him seemed to vanish. He surged forward, a storm-given flesh. The first defender came low. Jonah brushed him aside as if swatting away a fly. The second wrapped arms around his thighs, Jonah's knee lifted, and the man crumpled. A third tried to shoulder him. Jonah lowered his own, and the impact was like iron striking wood. Still he ran, the try-line beckoning like destiny itself. And as he burst through the final man, bodies tumbling in his wake, the world gasped. This was no longer sport, this was myth unfolding, live under the floodlights. The cliffhanger, when Jonah grounded the ball, the stadium erupted into a sound so violent it was almost holy. Strangers clutched one another, commentators screamed into microphones, their voices breaking. Children would later say it was the moment they decided to play rugby. Men would later confess it was the moment they knew rugby could never be the same. Jonah stood, chest heaving, sweat shining like armor beneath the lights. He did not raise his arms. He simply looked at the defenders still sprawled in the grass, then at the crowd, then at his hands gripping the ball. Inside, the boy whispered again, will they ever see the real me, or only the giant? But before the answer could come, the referee's whistle cut the air. The game moved on, the legend had only just begun. And somewhere in the silence between roars, Jonah Lomu realized he was no longer a man chasing destiny. He was destiny, and the world had just witnessed the first tremor of the earthquake he would become.